This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Back the home stretch here on Inside the Paint. I want to get some of your questions and your comments, and a couple of them come regarding Tyler Hero, and I'm going to combine two of them here. Joshua Matthews says that from what we've seen in the playoffs, Tyler Hero can't carry a team. He's somebody who is going to be a really good role player, but he can't carry a team. Isaiah points out that teams can choose to shut down Hero because it's like it takes away one option, and if you're going to pick your poison, you're trying to go after the guy who maybe scares you the most offensively. What I'll say about this is I think we sometimes forget, because he's already had big moments and high leverage moments in the playoffs, is Tyler Hero is still only 22 years old, right? So I think there's still another level that he can get to. The other thing I'll say is that Trae Young kind of let out some company secrets after game 2, I think, where they made it clear that their goal was to not let Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero beat them offensively. So I felt like throughout that series that there was going to be a point where Tyler Hero was able to turn it around and really get it going, and there would be a game where he would go out there and steal him a game. He didn't. He had a couple of good offensive moments, but nothing like you were expecting. I'm going to be curious to see what it's like as they move on to the next round and teams maybe choose to take somebody else away. Is that the moment when we see Tyler Hero step up? And if they're making Tyler Hero play you left-handed, and that allows somebody else to play you right-handed. So it almost felt, Ira, more to me like a game plan schematic thing. They were able to take him out of what he did, but at the expense of letting other guys get off, which we were able to see.
Yeah, I think also Tyler was bothered by a nagging injury. I haven't been able to get anyone to tell me what that was, but I heard there was some talk there about him possibly even taking some time in that series. You have that element in play there. I think more than that, Clay, I think you have an element also where it's like what you said. If something's going well elsewhere, don't be a pig. Don't think you have to get your 20. In game 1, if Duncan Robinson's hitting his 8 threes, let him hit his 8 threes. If you're having a game where Jimmy Butler's going off for 45 points, let him get his 45 points. Or he's going off for his 36 points, let him get his 36 points. So I think that's smart play also not to force the issue there. Was that the best of Tyler Hero? No. But you know what? For anyone to say Tyler can't carry a team in the playoffs, I know it was the bubble, but people get over it. What he did against Boston in that series when they went to the NBA Finals in 2020, Tyler Hero's had his big moments. And this is what happens when you're going to be named NBA Sixth Man Award winner. You are someone who's going to attract attention. So yes, Tyler got to play under the radar a lot. But again, last 2 games, they're missing Kyle Lowry. It's even easier to focus on a Tyler Hero. Last game without Jimmy Butler, same thing. So again, there is a little bit more focus. You do have to lift your game a little bit more. But there still were enough moments when the Heat needed relief points in that series when Tyler delivered them. So I still think he's more than capable. He is absolutely getting his 30, 35 minutes a game for the Heat going forward. He was good enough in that series, and clearly there's still another level.
It's interesting to me. You mentioned the injury thing, and if I'm not mistaken, he did fight some knee issues throughout the season, inflammation, just nagging, I think is the word you used.
Exactly.
We can think back to that. Something I found really interesting the other night, and this is kind of getting inside the weeds a little bit. I thought it was interesting when Eric Spoelstra came out before game 5, and he said, yeah, well, Jimmy, the knee was a little bit of a thing. He woke up feeling better this morning, but we're still not going to play him. And then quickly the Heat clarified that what he meant was Jimmy woke up and he was feeling worse. And I'm not saying it's because there's a chance they could have gotten fined if a better Jimmy Butler would have bet he should have been on the injury report the day before. But I'm saying there's a chance. And if there is a lingering issue for Tyler Hero that we haven't been able to discern, the fact that it hasn't been on the injury report doesn't mean anything, because there could be something they're just saying, look, he's going to play, so we're not going to worry about it. All right. The other comment that I want to attack is from the greater good. He said, and he asked a question, has James Harden jumped the shark? And for those of you who are not from the old days of Happy Days and know the term jump the shark, there was a moment in that series where Arthur Fonzarelli got on water skis and
Henry
jumped
Winkler,
over
for
a
those
shark.
who didn't watch, right. Henry Winkler.
Yes, he jumped over a shark in the series. And so people view that as the point where where Happy Days kind of started to go downhill, because they're like, all right, this is too much. This series has now gotten as high as it's going to go, and everything from now on out, we're going downhill. I think you can say with James Harden, the rule changes impacted him as much or more than anybody else in the NBA. I think he was also impacted a bit by the new basketball. We saw a lot of players, Duncan Robinson in particular, Paul George, CJ McCollum talked about it being an issue. I think age eventually sets in. I think you have this combination of all of these things to where, yeah, I think we've seen the best of James Harden. That doesn't mean that he can't come out and have a good episode every now and then like Happy Days did back in the day. But I think that if you're game planning against Philadelphia, Joel Embiid is the thing that is the guy who you're terrified of. He is the person who you're game planning against. To me, the guy who is second scariest on that team, and it's not particularly close, is Tyrese Maxey. And it's because not just the fact that he can score, but
I agree.
The Heat don't have anybody who is explosive enough and like superbly athletic enough to keep him from getting the basket on a consistent basis. Now, they're really good, and they have guys like Gabe Vincent, guys who can slow him down to a certain extent, but he's not like Trae Young, where you can throw bodies at him. And Trae Young's crafty, right? Like he's going to juke one way, go the other. His strength is not like his explosive speed. I think Trae Young and James Harden are similar in that respect, whereas Maxey is just, man, he's a bowling ball going downhill 100 miles an hour. So to me, and this gets back to the question about James Harden, to me, he's either the third or the fourth player that you're most concerned about with the Philadelphia 76ers if Tobias Harris comes out there and he plays like he did at some points in this series. So I agree. I think he's jumped the shark. Doesn't mean he can't beat you, but it does mean that you're not as concerned about him being their second option as you would be 3 years ago.
He looks like an old man. He looks like an old man trying to play basketball. And it's not.
And this is why we're good. I spend 2 minutes trying to like kindly say something, and you just like.
But that's what he does. It's like if you watch him, you go, "My God, what the hell happened to that guy?" And again, it's not a chronological or ageism thing because Jimmy is older, because Kyle Lowry is older. I'm just saying these guys are in their 30s also, but they have found a way to sustain their careers. Dwayne Wade certainly did it, and yet you watch Harden and he's fumbling around with the ball, and you're like, what the hell has happened to him? Conditioning has a lot to do with it. You know, we saw the pictures last year in the Rockets uniform. It's like, oh my God. And he's like, no, that's just the camera angle. But also, this is a guy who forced his way off of two teams with lethargic play. You can't just pick it up like that all of a sudden again. Now, that said, maybe he can because he has some unbelievable skills. But I think the Heat will be disciplined enough that I think what you said is right, Clay. If James Harden tries to be the number 2 option and gets in the way of Tyrese Maxey, I think the Heat are all for that. We saw what Maxey did in the team's 4th meeting this year when they sat Harden and sat Embiid, and he was terrific, and he won that game in Philadelphia. So if the Sixers game plan reverts to Embiid is the number 1 option, but Harden is number 2, the Heat will go, perfect, we're good for that. We're set up for that. As long as you don't have this little snot-nosed kid, from Kentucky running around here creating problems again, we'll deal with that. That's why it's interesting. When we discuss Philly, which of course should win the series because no one has ever blown a 3-0 lead in the history of the NBA playoffs, so I understand our focus there, but there are specific players you look at as problematic. I'm not sure even with Toronto and Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, God bless him, you necessarily look at it going, we have to control this guy or we lose. Mm-hmm. He'd look that way at Trae Young in the first round. I think they'd look that way at Joel Embiid and maybe still James Harden in the second round. But I don't think there's a Toronto player that has a big circle around him on the top of the Heat scouting board, say, kill the head of the snake. Because I don't know where the hell the head of the snake is when it comes to the Raptors and the way they play. Could be Scotty Barnes for all we know.
Oh, yeah, and that was the other thing is in the games where they were blown out, I think Scotty got hurt in the first one, right? And then he missed the second game.
Correct.
Because, I mean, the impact that he's made on that team is great. Now, to your point, he's still not the guy that, like, you're saying, hey, the last thing we want is for him to consistently get the ball and go ISO in the fourth quarter of a game. So when you're looking ahead to these matchups, and this is where we're going around the NBA, we're going to look at this from a Heat-centric point of view. We could talk about the Western Conference at another point. Fred VanVleet is doubtful for tonight, right? And I don't know if there's any update there, but he didn't play in the last game either, and they're able to go out there and win. If they're able to win without him, I think it kind of solidifies that point that you just made, that he's a guy that I think concerns you a little bit more than anybody else on the Raptors team as far as him getting the ball. And
maybe Siakam, but okay.
Yeah, but as far as when I saw the Heat play him, he's the guy who's more likely to get his own shot to. Whereas with Siakam, I'm okay with Bam guarding him. Like, I don't think that
Or
Bam's going to let him get
even
away.
PJ Tucker. Yeah.
But yes. So I'm okay with that. Whereas with Philly, like there's nobody that you are 100% comfortable going up against Joel Embiid. Like there's as great as Bam is defensively, and I think he would take that challenge. And I think, by the way, he's seen that he doesn't have to do a whole lot on offense for them to win. He can just focus specifically on defense. Joel's still going to get his. So as much as Toronto scares you in that they're going to make that series a grind, I'm not sure they scare you enough to where in 4 games they have somebody who scares you enough that they're going to make the play to win 4 ball games throughout a 7-game series. Could happen, but I doubt it. So if it is Philly, then I think it gets back to exactly what we were saying, that these are the matchups that you're concerned about. I do want to talk a little bit about what we saw in the Boston-Brooklyn series.
Sure.
And so we only got 5 minutes left. I think it's a combination of things. Number one, I think we all absolutely underestimated just how good Boston is. I think number 2, it doesn't hurt that Udoka came from Brooklyn and knew a bit about what made those guys tick and was able to kind of implement defensive schemes to really make their life miserable. And hats off to him. It was a heck of a coaching job. The last thing I want to say is when I heard Steve Nash up there lamenting the fact that they didn't have the continuity, that the guys didn't play together, and he was just kind of shaking his head and almost laughing like, oh, this is all we can do. Ira, it took me back to game 1 of this regular season when the Heat went out there with a bunch of new guys, had never played together before in their entire lives. They went out there and they absolutely annihilated the Bucks in game 1. And it was because they busted their butts in training camp to get ready for the regular season. Ira, if a bunch of guys care enough about the common goal to go out there and work hard and coalesce, it doesn't take that long. It does. You can, and I understand Kyrie Irving wasn't able to have this consistent practice schedule with the guys. He wasn't able to play the games throughout the course of the season, but you had enough time to where you could get guys on the same page and you could play at least to a level where you don't get your butt swept in the first round. So the problems in that organization run a lot deeper than chemistry and coalescing. And I do think Boston deserves a ton of credit, but to me, that series was more about Brooklyn and just not coming together when they needed to the most.
I think it was more about Boston because I think Boston's defense has been top of the league since midseason. Again, like the Heat sort of did with Atlanta, they found a way to smother you. This is the playoffs. This is where you get. I mean, why did the Heat win the other day by 97-94? These are the scores you get. This is what happens. The games slow down. You have to be able to win on that side of the ball. That's what the Heat did in their series. That's what Boston did in their series. That's what Milwaukee can do in their series also. You have to succeed on that side of the ball. The other point is, if Trae Young was being defended 2-on-1, and we spoke about Atlanta, therefore could not beat 4-on-3, winning that way, I think you could look at it almost as if the Celtics were willing to commit 3 defenders to Durant and to Kyrie, and the rest of the Nets couldn't win playing 3-on-2. Mm-hmm. Depth of talent. I know people always downplay depth of talent in the playoffs. That is, you stars that win, and I agree with that. But if there is such a massive drop-off, as you will see with Philadelphia's bench, the way they're playing right now, that can make a difference. I know Bruce Brown had his moments, but those were garbage points. God bless him, and he's going to get paid because of it. Seth Curry was good but not great. Andre Drummond played his way defensively out of that series.
Claxton can't make a free throw.
Missed 10 in a row right there. So that's part of it also. Yes, depth can be overstated in the playoffs. I agree. But when you're throwing garbage out there with your stars, I think that's what happened to the Nets. They realized their big 2 needed more help. And Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving looked around and there wasn't a goddamn person there that they could trust to help get them over the hump. That's why they had James Harden. That's why they tried to make it work until James Harden, by all accounts, quit on them. That was a team designed from the opening day of camp to be the Brooklyn Nets' big 3. And then one of the big 3 disappeared, and they never were able to recover, and Ben Simmons never was able to show up.
By the way, this is why I love Ira. I go off on my rant about Brooklyn. He says, no, I think it's more about Boston. Here's why it's more about Brooklyn.
Yeah, but I think it's Boston's defense first.
I'm joking.
I think it's Boston's defense first, Brooklyn's roster second.
Yeah, and look, I think, fortunately or unfortunately, from a Heat perspective, I think the signs are pointing to you finding that out in the
Yes.
conference finals. And obviously, there's a lot of things that have to happen before we
really
get to that
good,
point.
really well
Boston-
coached, a
I
bunch of
agree.
contributors. And again, when people ask me about Heat Celtics and why might you favor the Celtics, and I say because in game, I probably would take Jason Tatum over Jimmy Butler. No disrespect to Jimmy, but you also have that outside shooting consistency from Jason Tatum that you don't have from Jimmy Butler. So that will be a battle. That could be your 7 right there.
We got so much time to look ahead to that. Hopefully, we're sitting here in a couple of weeks, and that's the series that we're talking about. But for now, enjoy Game 6 tonight between the Raptors and the 76ers. Whoever the best matchup for the Heat is, we'd obviously like to see that because we want to talk more Heat basketball coming up in the next couple of weeks. Guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. You guys make this show great. Make sure on the way out, smash the like button. It does us a huge favor. The Big O Show, live from Vegas, rolls on next right here on The Big O Show.
This is the Big O Show.